recording, and I will hide this. All right, I will pin me. So if there's any questions, please just come off mute and speak because I don't have everyone up on here. So for the recording, I just have myself. So here we are on our final class of Unbound. What are boundaries? And so we've learned a lot in this about writing boundary statements and understanding what that looks like, looking at a house and the boundaries around the house. And each of you have found uh, common challenges that we all face with having unhealthy boundaries or being unbound, as well as what it would look like to be healthy. And so to round this up, this is a real question. What is intimacy? You can answer either or both of these. And what does intimacy look like or feel like to you? Always like to get the starting point for people before we get into a lesson. You know me. So any takers on this question? No one's coming off mute. No one has any thoughts, or no one wants to be on blast.
I'll try. Number two, what is it like? Oh no, number one is intimacy to me is being vulnerable.
Okay.
Being vulnerable.
I guess that kind of goes to number two, that's what it probably, um, well, lack of intimacy then would be not being vulnerable, huh?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, I'm not going to pull teeth here. Um,
Okay, how about being close?
being close? Yeah. Yeah, if that's your definition, then sure, that's a good definition because it's yours. So that's
Yeah.
all, always good. Any other takers on this question before I close it
I know
down?
the answer.
Sorry, I was in the shower, but is my background noise too much? I can turn
Would
it
you
off.
say I can't hear you? I'm joking.
Oh, okay. Um, so kind of like I think it was Miss Teresa that said being vulnerable, being the ability. So question one, the ability to be naked in the physical and non-physical sense, with the person, and then what does it look like when you are just you feel like you have to be clothed around this person.
Mm, okay, good one. Any other?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Intimacy for me means or looks like um being so close with someone that none of your basically being able to show your faults and just being so close with someone that they know you inside and out, like they know everything about you. You're just so close. You're like one with the person, and I'm talking about a person in human form, and it's like you can know their thoughts or they can know your thoughts. You're just so close from the time that you spend together. It's a lot of quality time spent with them, and so you're just really really close, and you're sensitive to their needs and vice versa. And lack of intimacy, what does lack of intimacy look or feel like for me? It's just the total opposite. So there's a wall up. You're not communicating. You don't care to know what they're thinking or how they're feeling, and or they don't care to know, vice versa. And it really, um, their happiness, their well-being, really doesn't matter. And there's just and with intimacy, to me, um, there's like this unspoken love that is there, um, when you allow someone into your space like that.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? Before we move on? Well, our text that we're going to be talking from, and I know Teresa loves this Song of Solomon. Where has your love gone, most beautiful woman? Which way has he turned? We will seek him with you. And so when you have lack of intimacy, that's what it's, where have the person that you love gone? They kind of shrink back. I'm going to be talking about the lack of intimacy first, and then I'll talk about to kind of bridges to what we'll be talking about next week in a new book, Unmasked, about what intimacy is. And intimacy, I think I have 12 different dimensions that I put, and I'm not going to go over them in detail. I will have Paige send this out so that if you want the details, you'll have them in the slides, but I'm not going to go over all the areas of intimacy. But I think you might be surprised at all the ways we can be intimate and how that relates to us. So, the lack of intimacy, if we start with what intimacy is, a feeling of closeness, like you guys said, a connectedness in interpersonal relationships. When we think about biblical intimacy, because this is a Bible study, it comprises of a holistic covenant-based connection and encompassing, spiritual oneness, emotional vulnerability, like you guys said, and physical unity. It involves a deep relationship characterized by being vulnerable, selfless, open in communication, shared faith, mutual submission, and particularly within a marriage where sexual intimacy is sacred. And so there's a bunch of dynamics that go into intimacy. And many times, if you look at the secular view, they leave out the spiritual side. And so we will have some secular thought and we will have biblical thought. I overlay biblical thought with the secular thought because we have to think of the whole person. It has to be a holistic view of intimacy. And that's what I want you guys, when you're thinking about intimacy, I want you to kind of think holistically in your endeavor so that all of you can be satisfied, not just the parts of you that you think needs to be satisfied, but all of you. And you'll maybe see what all of you means in a minute. What to do about lack of intimacy? A lack of intimacy then is not feeling close, connected, committed, or communicated to. In a very generic sense, those are the characteristics of lack of intimacy. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this lack of intimacy down into four primary categories, some of which is more detailed than others. But we'll talk about psychological and emotional factors so that you can understand what they are. Issues in the relationship and communications, physical factors, and behavioral patterns. So that you can think when you're going through this, when I'm going through this, what areas do you most suffer from? Because when you understand what area you most suffer from when we're going through the unbound, you can begin to heal or find areas of healing in those areas where you're suffering or finding repeated patterns of not feeling close to people, not feeling like anyone knows you, like you're walking through this world and does anybody know I'm really here? Would it matter if I was alive or dead? Whatever that lack of intimacy will be, and what puts you there, because all of these factors have the lack of intimacy show up. If you've been in abusive relationships, if you were abused as a child, that lack of intimacy will look different than people who grew up in a house where no one talked. It will be a different set of intimacy issues that both of those criteria will come up with. And I'll be talking about all four of these. So what's the first one? Psychological and emotional factors. What does that look like? I'm not going to read the slides, just the dark, the boldness. But like I said, you'll have these. If you find yourself there, you can study them more. Fear of vulnerability. That's what everyone was just talking about. Being vulnerable. And when you lack intimacy, you don't feel like you can be vulnerable because you don't want to be hurt, rejected, and busted and disgusted. So, like you all said, you put up walls. You have low self-esteem issues. You have mental health issues of anxiety, depression, stressed all the time. Um, and then negative cycles. You pick people that make you start cycles. One of your partners, you'll be in today, and then they're not doing anything, so you back out, and then they're in, and you're just like ships in the night. These negative cycles leads to feelings of lack of intimacy, and it has a mental and an emotional impact on you when we don't have that intimacy because we were created for intimacy. Psychological issues, talking about past traumas. I put this slide up here. Paige and I was talking about trauma and an association, and she was talking about her attachment style being avoidance disorganized. And so your attachment style will have a lot to do with how intimate you are. Current stress issues that you might have can cause lack of intimacy issues, trust, security, and then common stresses like just unresolved conflict. You just don't know how to put closure to stuff, don't know how to get over that trauma, don't know how to get over you figure it out. These are additional factors that go into feeling lack of intimacy. We have to understand our attachment style. We have to understand our trauma. And we have to, well, no, you don't have to do anything. But if we want to have intimacy, if that's important to you, understanding your trauma and getting over it and understanding how you attach to people is going to be important because it'll help you heal. And that's what, when we're looking at the workbook and looking at stuff in Unmasked, that's what we're going a little bit deeper. Remember when we talked about the boundaries and we were outside the borders? Now we're going to come inside of the house. We're going to, you sort of understand what it means to let people in the fence, make them sure you're in the front yard, making sure your gates are secure. But now we're at the entry point, and what is stopping people? What is stopping you, more importantly? And how were your intimate, what's intimate? How were you shaped and formed to form those opinions that you have about intimacy? What things are healthy about it and what things are unhealthy about it. And we want to get to a place where we're healthy with intimacy. Issues in relationships and communication. So this is unresolved conflicts and resentment. Poor communication styles. We have to understand how to talk to people, how not only to talk to people, but how to receive when people are talking to you, because there's a whole lot of different communication styles. And so we have to learn how to communicate, and avoidance is not a good communication style. That is not going to allow you to solve conflict. It's not going to allow you to get intimate with someone because conflict, healthy conflict, actually is good for a relationship because it's like being in a war, or since many of us haven't been in a war, it's going through things with someone, and because you've gone through it with the person, it makes the relationship better because it comes to resolve and you've learned something about each other. And then emotional disconnections, feeling unappreciated, feeling like you're just being used, taken advantage of, understanding an emotional disconnect when you're married and you're living like roommates. That is not really a recipe for an intimate relationship. And then, of course, having a busy schedule, never even having time to sit down and to talk to each other, not having time to even have energy to connect. You're just tired by the time you come home. You just want to go in a cave and just leave me alone. I'm just exhausted. That can also lead to a distance in relationships. Physical factors are health issues. If you're sick all the time, if you have hormonal issues, if you have all types of health concerns and diseases, that can make those factors of being intimacy wrong. I had a lady who one time was having, what did she have? One of those communicable diseases, and she was always upset because she's like, I can't get married, I can't have a relationship because I have this disease. And long story short, she did get remarried. um she was able to have relationships, but she had to get to the point where she thought and she believed that intimacy was possible, but because for years she thought it was never possible because of the disease that she had. You can't discount God. You have to want to be close. You have to want, regardless of health issues and issues of concern, because intimacy is far greater than the physical contact, and we'll learn that. Physical distance, you know, um, when you don't hold hands, when you stop hugging, when you stop cuddling, when you stop doing things to foster the physical connection, which is one part of intimacy, the physical side is a part, it's just not all of it. We need that dynamic in relationships. And then performance anxieties, worrying about how you perform sexually. I know I had another couple who they could not stay together because of his sexual issues that he had. And so she had a lot of avoidance. I had another couple who got married and they didn't come to counseling until after they were married, try to get them to do before. And here the girl would not, they didn't consummate their marriage. First she said it was because before she didn't want to have sex. And then after they were married for 2, 3 years and the marriage was never consummated. That can lead to lack of intimacy. And so we have to understand being competitive also can have lack of intimacy. You're trying to one up each other. And no one wants to be in a relationship where they feel like they're in a basketball or football game, always trying to one up each other and competing with one another. That could also lead to lack of intimacy. And then avoidance, then the behavior issues. If someone's whipping on you, you really don't want to be intimate with that person because you want to, you don't feel close to someone that's physically abusing you, making you feel scared, speaking negatively to you all the time, destroying your inner self. Those behavioral issues will also lead to lack of intimacy because you're afraid. You're afraid that you're walking on eggshells, not knowing what's going to be good and what's going to be bad. So when we think about lack of intimacy, how is lack of intimacy connected to boundaries? Okay. And how we get unbound. A lack of intimacy causes partners to withdraw or seek connections from other places. If you're not going to be intimate with me, I'll find someone else who will. And when you lack boundaries, frequently causes a breakdown in intimacy, which leads to codependencies or fear or past trauma. And so if you don't have intimacy and if you don't have boundaries, this ends up with individuals that will experience without clear boundaries, you'll have emotional burnout and you feel like you're being taken advantage of. And so when you lack intimacy, you lack boundaries, what that's going to have you do is have a life of being unbound. Unbound in your relationship. You'll start feeling like a victim. You'll start feeling unloved. You'll start feeling weak. You'll start feeling all of these things, and it will cripple you in your future relationships. That's what life without boundaries will have you look like. It cripples your relationships. It cripples you from having a healthy, strong relationship. Um, and so when you think of that, a lack of intimacy and living unbound results, like I say, in bondage. No boundaries, no intimacy. If you cannot be honest with yourself and your own needs, that's why you don't have your own boundaries. How can then you be confident in communicating with other people and being intimate with other people if you don't even know your own needs? You can't be intimate with something you don't know about yourself. That's how come boundaries are so important. Knowing you, knowing what's making you secure, knowing what's making you insecure, and being able to communicate it and stop it if need be will help you with your intimacy. Does I'll stop there for a minute to make sure you understand how boundaries or the lack thereof relates to not having intimacy or having issues with that. You understand that overlap? Does anyone have questions on that? Okay, it must be okay. All right. So when you lack intimacy and you're feeling unbound, you begin to have resentment. You begin to have fear. You begin to relive things that you shouldn't be living. And that's where cycles and relationship dysfunctions happen because there's no boundaries. You'll feel unsafe. And then you'll have all these emotional issues and traumas that we talked about earlier on why you have lack of intimacy. In order to rebuild these connections requires open communication and setting healthy limits and fostering trust. That's what intimacy is. The only way to fix a lack of intimacy is to learn how to be intimate. Duh, right? And so the lack of intimacy is overcome by intimacy. So the key to principles to intimacy, really, we have to, well, you don't have to. Intimacy starts with God. God initiates it. We have to recognize God's desire for intimacy with us, and His grace is inviting you in. When we understand that God is there wanting that intimacy with us, we won't feel, we shouldn't feel as lonely and feeling abandoned because God is with you and He has not forsaken you. So even though your partner is ignoring you, there's a part of you that can feel valued and loved because you know God loves you and wants to be intimate with you. So that spiritual connection is going to be important, not only to God, but also the other person. Growing in the knowledge received from God happens in 4 dimensions. How do you know God is there? How do you know that He wants to be intimate with you? Through revelation. God will reveal Himself through the Word, knowing His Word, knowing His nature, knowing that He can come through for you. That revelation knowledge can help draw you closer to Him so that you can have that intimacy. Having faith and trusting God in the unseen when things just look miserable, you can have that knowing that God is there because of your faith. Knowing that God is there also comes with a deep, personal, and committed relationship. Separate yourself, consecrate yourself based on God. When you make that separation and separate your life unto Him, that will make a difference in having you know that God is there with you. And then, of course, the other way of knowing is through experience, through your life experience, understanding His voice, having Him come through when you call out to Him and He answers. Knowing God and knowing that God has initiated that relationship with you is the beginning of understanding intimacy because he will be the center and the foundation of your intimacy. And understanding intimacy, it's a process. It's a process with God. It's a process with people. It's not you're just gonna not gonna roll over one day and say, "Oh, I'm intimate with God. Oh, I'm intimate with my spouse. Oh, I understand how to walk in intimacy now." No, it's a process. It's going to take time. It's going to take patience, and it's going to take consistency. And consistency in all areas where intimacy can be built. Before I go and talk about the types and the areas of intimacy, I'm going to ask a question. What are the areas of intimacy that you can think of? And or how many areas of it, you can give me a number or you can give me a type where intimacy plays. Do you have you ever thought about that? When you think about being intimate, like what does that mean to you? I asked that question before about being close, but close how? Any thoughts on that? Quiet class tonight.
I came off of mute.
I see you, Late. Go ahead.
So you're saying ways?
Yeah, there's different types of intimacy, and and you can give me a number, two types, five types, 100 types, or you can say, well, I know this type or that type.
Okay, so I don't know any types, so I can just describe it as a how I see it. So intimate to where, you know, you're so close, you know each other's thoughts. You a lot of people say, "Well, I got to talk to my husband about it," but they already know what the answer is going to be. Type, type of connection with the person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, a physical intimacy.
Okay.
Um, and then also there's just a sense of vulnerability uh, where you let down your guard. That's the best way I can explain. So you would share your secrets, or you let down your guard. You're comfortable enough with this person to just or yeah to be yourself. So there's just um a
Okay.
confidence that you have,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, in the relationship. So and those are
So
pretty much. Oh,
physical, emotional, and maybe psychological are the three types possibly that you've just described.
oh, okay. I
Okay.
didn't know. And
Yeah.
then the talking piece where there's
Communication.
communication.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's communication where you're just, you're on point with the person. You can finish their sentences, and you guys are very communicative. You stay in contact, not like stalker type or
Right, right.
obsession,
So
but just that you've
communication.
got an open line of communication and
Mm-hmm.
understanding.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got.
Okay, so that's four possibly you came up with. Anyone else? Okay.
One is where you're spending time with that person, where you have like um, activities that you do
Okay.
together.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Experiential. Another type. That's four, five with the four that Tay had.
Hmm.
Sharon had one. Any other types? Where
Well,
did,
it's like trust, you know,
uh-huh.
someone you trust,
Uh-huh.
and like Sharon said, someone you talk to, you get to know their ways, they get to know your ways, you get to just about think alike, you know, on one accord.
Okay. Okay, I think both of those ways were mentioned. Any other ones we can think of?
Hmm.
Okay. Well, it's going to be important so that you can build these relationships that you kind of have a sense of what those are. And I'll tell you what those are. I think there's 12 of them. Um, Key intimacy principles. Um, we focus on God and strengthen our vertical relationships so that we can get our horizontal relationships right. When you think about intimacy in marriage, first you talk about intimacy with God, we just talked about. Now we're talking about intimacy in marriage in a emotional way. Biblically, these are texts that talks about marriage and intimacy and coming one flesh. So sexuality is going to be important. Mutual fulfillment, meet the sexual desires, glorifying God through that intimacy, and guarding against lust. And so when we think about intimacy in marriage, sexually and emotionally, these are scriptures that talk about that. If you don't think the Bible talked about it, I want to give scripture on that because it does talk about sexual intimacy and what that looks like, and what his thoughts are in that area. These are the areas I broke it down into. You have physical, and many of the things that you talked about are in the area of physical and soulish areas of intimacy. The further out you go is where we most talk about our intimacy, physical being the main one. But then you also have an inner one, which deals with your soul, which is your mind, your will, and emotions. We talked about intellectual, we talked about emotional, and we talked about communication. But there's other types that are in scripture as well as in psychology. Sharon mentioned experiential or work. These are all areas when you think about intimacy. So, for example, some people financially, if they don't feel secure, they don't have a house, they don't have things to feed their family, and they can't talk about finances, that's going to be an area that can cause division. As a matter of fact, besides sexual, finances are two of the highest reasons why people divorce. And so we have to understand financially is part of finances is part of that intimacy that you're growing in. But these are the areas. And what I kind of came up with for this is I broke it down into the areas: flesh, your soul, and your spirit. The boundary, the boundaries that we're seeking to satisfy with the physical boundaries is touch. We have to understand we need people to touch us. We know that there are so many studies about babies when they were first born, if they're not touched, that they don't develop properly. So touch is very important, and when that boundary is violated, that's what's going to have lack of intimacy. So it's very important to understand the boundary as well as the intimacy type, because if you're lacking in these things, you may feel like, if for example, if all you think intimacy is physical, and you're being physical with someone and you still feel like you're not intimate, well, look at all the other areas in your life that's not being fulfilled, that's having a hole in your soul, having a hole in your spirit, because all of these areas are not being satisfied. You have to have fun with people. You have to feel like that person's your friend. You have to feel secure with that person. Your innermost emotions have to be satisfied intellectually. You don't want to be going around with somebody who's an idiot, right? There's a level of of intellect that you want to be able to have a conversation. You just don't want them to be playing Game Boy all the time. Or the girls just in the whatever women would do. I mean, the man wants that intellect also. They have to have an imagination and being creative to do stuff. We talked about the conflict and communication, but what's so important, because it's the core of our intimacy, is our spirit and that covenant, that commitment. We want commitment. We don't want to be intimate with people that are not committed to us. And so the spiritual realm and having that faith realm is all part of, I see that hand, Late, is all part of our intimacy. Intimacy is not all about touch. It's about all of these areas. My lover, it says in Song of Psalms 6 and 3, I am my lover's and my lover is mine. And Solomon, all of the person has to be embraced. For you to feel total intimacy with people, we need to get in touch with all of these areas in our body, in our soul, and in our spirit. When we get all of these areas touched in intimacy, we will have that closeness so that we will feel like we're never alone. Go ahead, Late.
Well, I have these three P's for my um, desired relationship that I wanted to connect with the person on, or my desired marriage relationship.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to know where these fit and if they fit the three things, or I need to add something to this, another P. But it's passion, it's purpose, and it's promise. So, the passion for one another, the passion for God, just the purpose, the God given purpose, our purpose in life, and then promises from God. So basically, do they align with
Passion,
the,
passion is on the body.
okay?
Communication, what was that?
Oh, I had purpose and promise. I was just
Promise.
describing them.
So the promise is the communication,
Okay.
and I would think purpose um is like your flesh too. That's experiential or work related.
I was thinking our God given purpose. Like, I don't want to be with somebody that does not have or know their God given purpose because they're not going to walk it out. If I'm evangelist and they think that they're, I don't know. I just can't. It has to be a aligned purpose for God.
Well,
Just
I mean, the work that you're doing is going to be work done in the flesh, and you
okay.
want the person committed to that work, which is the spiritual covenantal part. Um, and so those would be the areas that I see. You're satisfying the flesh, you're satisfying some of your soul, and then the commitment for possibly fulfilling the purposes that God has given them could possibly be that covenantal one. But
Okay, got it.
I would say that you need a statement for every one of these areas to be whole.
Amen.
And so great, you have three, but you need to have all of these areas satisfied to feel totally intimate in a relationship. And I know these are words, and I'll come back to the words, but what I did is I have descriptions. I didn't put the scriptures, but some of these have italics, which are scriptural definitions for these. And so for everything that's out here, like when you see a blank, strengthening and bond through shared adventure, is biblical as well as secular. So I have both definitions in here so that you can see what this actually means. So you don't just have the words, but you have the definitions for this table. Does everyone understand why you would need all of these areas in intimacy, besides what the Bible says? But do you understand why all of these places would be important? Or should I say it this way? Which one of these intimacies types do you think is not important to be intimate? Does that mean everyone thinks they all are? We're quiet today.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. I never thought about there were so many. But now that you put it on the
Right.
table, yeah, they're definitely all applicable
Hmm.
or needed.
Yeah, our dimension and intimacy, okay, is usually out in the outer realm as it relates to flesh. We want to know what their friends are like. These now generation, they want to have sex with the person before they marry because they don't want to be stuck with somebody and they can't, eh, whatever. Um, they want to have fun with the person. They want to make sure they have job and they want to make sure they have money. Maybe they'll talk about their communication styles or what they're doing. Maybe they'll talk about some intellectual stuff. But all of these things are important. All of these areas are important for you to feel whole. And so when you're thinking about being unbound and being when we think about unmasked and doing the workbook and the questions, think about these areas that maybe you've never thought about before. And maybe that could be if you're not feeling intimate with someone, maybe it's because you don't know within yourself how these intimacy types actually play out in you. And so really begin to think about all of these areas of intimacy in you, because if you understand what this means in you, when you're looking for a mate, or maybe you're married already, you can begin to understand if you're not feeling loved, if you're not feeling close, it's not just because you're not physically touching, but it could be because you feel like they're not your friend, or you might feel, whatever you're feeling. Maybe it's spiritual. Maybe the person's got everything else, but there's no spiritual connection. And since the spiritual connection is the core, because God is the center, if you're a believer particularly, that can make you feel like you're not that close with the person because spiritually you're not connected and intimate. And that can make you feel unbalanced. And so that would give you areas that you can pray in your marriages, in your relationship, and so that these boundaries can be satisfied and your into all intimacy types can be covered. I just wanted to show you a picture of that. I wanted to do it in an easier fashion than showing you that big circle. I mean, all those definitions. I wanted you to grasp where this is coming from, your flesh, your soul, and your spirit. So hopefully this is helpful for you to understand if you're not feeling intimate, why you're not feeling intimate, and you might not understand it now, but maybe this will give you some food for thought to dig into this so that you can begin to feel whole. Okay? If there's no questions with that, we're going to get into intimacy. So when we think about intimacy, this is biblical intimacy. Community is two things. Communicating and connecting are the two areas that we're going to talk about. That's what the Bible talks about. And I talked about this a little bit before. Trusting God's design for closeness. Do you really believe that Genesis account that what God has put together, no man can separate. And commitment. Do you really believe in commitment? Because if you don't believe in commitment, you're going to have a hard time with God's thoughts on relationships because you can be whatever we don't have to commit. We can just kind of do whatever we want to do. We can have this open marriage. You can go and do what you want to do. As long as we come together and pay these bills, we're all good. Well, that's going to not be God's design for intimacy. So take that into account when I'm going through. This is God's plan, not the world's plan of intimacy. This is God's plan. Trusting relationship with God first is going to be important, which models how we can be intimate with other human beings. When I'm talking to men, I tell them, yeah, I don't care what that woman does. Your job is to die. You have to die for her. That's your job. Your job is to submit yourself, and you're the head. That means you got to sacrifice your head. You got to be willing to cut it off. You have a greater responsibility because you have to die for her. She has to submit to you, but you've got to die. And so, understanding that relationship, you have to be intimate with God in order to die for this woman that's a pain in the neck. When I'm talking to men about this, we have to understand God has to come first. Same thing for women. This guy may be crazy, he might be doing stuff, but you're submitting unto the Lord in this, and you're getting that strength from God when he's out of alignment. You still have to follow God's order and instructions, but like I was telling Paige, you don't follow someone in sin. Yes, they're the head of the household, but they're telling you to do something that's outside of God's will. No, I don't have to follow you and jump off a cliff because you're the head of household and you're telling me to jump off a cliff. No, I don't have to follow that. Okay. So trusting God, that's why you got to trust God first. Prioritize shared spiritual practices. That's kind of what Late was saying about purpose. We have to prioritize. Where does that fit in your relationship? Where does that fit in your marriages? You know, do you want him to be X and he wants to be Y and y'all are in contention? He doesn't want to be in a church and you do, and that's causing contention. Those priorities have to be for you to be close and committed to each other. Those things have to be shared. Those things have to be talked about. And then recognize it as a journey. It's going to be built over time. When you're 20 years old, your direction is going to be different when you're 30, which is different than when you're 40. So this means the closest is going to change throughout the process of your life with this person. What I did and thought was important when I was 20 is surely not important at 60. It's just not. I'm just at a different place than when I was in my 20s, now that I'm on this end of my life. And so commitment is something is a journey. It's not a one and done. And then connecting, building a deep connection with God through study, prayer, and obedience. That study, prayer, and obedience time also has to not only be horizontal but vertical. You have to do that time with your spouse. Have them pray for you, studying with you, and that obedience is going to be important. Creating space to be honest and mutual. Many times when I'm doing marriage thing, I always tell them to institute a date night. You have to have a date night and you have to have an individual time. Like a date night once a week. I say, okay, start once a month. Try to build to once a week. But if you don't like each other, just start with once a month and make it consistent. Um, you have to create that space to get to know one another, to get that mutual support without the kids, without talking about the problems. It's just you and that person. Have fun together. Go bowling. Do something fun. Once a month, once a week is really a great thing to do once a week. But I know that's not good for some people, but hopefully that'll be good. Fostering closeness in relationship, in marriage and dating, and that shared spiritual practice. Practice being vulnerable. Tell them a little bit of stuff. Don't just, on the first date tell them everything, but as you're dating, as you're going, practice areas and test the water. Test the water with something that you're comfortable with, but not just so vulnerable that they can use you. Sometimes that vulnerability testing is so that you can learn to open up, you can learn to communicate. I keep saying, I keep using Paige because we just been having these conversations that tell him the truth. And if he doesn't like it, it's better to tell the truth now than wait until you're in this thing altogether, because telling the truth is allowing you to open up, is allowing you to communicate your feelings. Um, and teaching you how to be open when you were closed up. And so sometimes those relationships help you practice who you want to be. And maybe you're practicing on somebody that not meant to be with you, but you can learn from that practice. Sharing together, aligning with God's word and mutual growth. So with God, these are how you can grow spiritually intimate with God. So we're talking about spiritually first, then we'll talk about natural. Have a heart willing to be transformed. Allow God to change your heart. Allow God to soften your heart. Don't be so hard. Don't be so closed that you won't allow God in. That's a come. It starts with God, because once you're intimate with God and He softens that heart, it'll allow you to begin to reach out to other people. It's really not a good thing to try to be intimate with other people and then say, well, God will come later, because the intimacy is not going to be full. Because remember, the center of that intimacy is spiritual connection, covenant, commitment. And that has to be here. You have to learn that in a safe environment. You might not learn it in this horizontal environment first, because you're still trying to get to know that person. Yes, some of us are still trying to get to know God, but we're trusting God. We're saying we believe God. And so learning to be vulnerable with God first could be an easier thing than being vulnerable with this other person. So let them transform your heart. And then self denial. Let go of your will and be willing to follow God. Be willing to follow his leading when he tells you to say something. "Oh, I don't want to say that because that's just too much." Be vulnerable. God, if God is leading you to say something, then he's going to guide you through the uncomfortableness of saying it. Deep consecration. Be willing to pay the cost for deep closeness. Sometimes we want that deep personal relationship, but we're not willing to go deep or personal. Start with God. Start deep and personal with God. Get into practice with God, and then maybe you'll be able to begin that deep closeness with other people. You got to start somewhere. Prioritize your time. I remember years ago now, my time I prioritized was usually at night, when the kids were to bed. I'd have that time, and then Friday nights was my date night with God. I would carve out Friday nights as my date night, and I would study, and that would be my time where God would meet me. And I was getting excited about meeting him. But I had that scheduled time. Even when the kids were babies, I tried to get the house clean, the kids in bed, and everything by 8 o'clock. So at 8 o'clock on, they're in bed. I can have that quiet time. I made it a priority. Didn't always work, but that was my goal, so that I didn't have any interruptions, any distractions, because it was important to me to hold me up, to hold me together. Studying the Word of God. Read the Bible, know the Bible. Be willing to grow in the Word of God. As intimacy grows with God, your knowledge of Him will grow. But if you don't set time aside, you can guarantee this. If you don't set time aside for God, you won't get to know God. If you don't get to set aside time for your mate, you won't get to know your mate. You have to make priorities. You want all this intimacy, but you don't have any time. How's that going to work? Well, let me just ask you, how is that working for you? It's probably not. It's going to take some commitment, and it's going to take time for this intimacy to grow. When you talk about growing spiritually, pray and listen. Talk to God daily, confess your sins, and listen for his voice. Listen for an answer for what he's saying about what you're saying. Truth and obedience is going to be important. And then live for Him. Align your life with His will and make His priorities your priorities. That is going to be how that intimacy with God is going to be grown. And so, if you're having problems, maybe you're great with intimacy with your spouse, but maybe you're not intimate with God. All of those areas that I talked about, have fun with God. Learn to communicate with God. Give them your finances. All of those areas that I talked about, they hold true for God too. He wants all of us. So learn to be intimate with God in all of those areas, just like you are a natural person spiritually. Do you trust God in all of those areas? Because if you don't, maybe grow spiritually in those areas where you're not quite intimate with God. You don't even really know to have fun with God. I know God be cracking me up. You got to have fun with him. Okay, now this is in marriage and dating. This is in the natural sense. Again, the first thing is God has to be the foundation. Well, no, it doesn't have to be, but as a Christian, you should want God to be the foundation of true intimacy that flows through you, trusting God and trusting relationship. That's why the first thing I do when new relationships come, God, what is this about? How do you want us to interact? That's going to be foundational to me when I have people in my relationship. Not just people that are walking down the street. I don't ask that question, but when they're coming into my life and we're building a life somehow together, that's when that question I ask. I want him. I want to stay out of danger, so it's better for me to ask him, what is this relationship about? Pray, personal prayer. If you want to have a prayer life with your partner, you better have a prayer life by yourself. And so ask God for help to be intimate with him and with your spouse. Learn how to be intimate. Let God teach you how to be intimate and pray that into your life. Have an open dialogue with your spouse, your boyfriend, girlfriend. What are your beliefs, values, goals, spiritual life? Be open and honest with the person. How many kids you want, how many you don't want. If you want a dog, I mean, just have an open dialogue about who you are and the things that you are interested in. Communicate and understanding. Deeply knowing and studying your partner. Discuss his or her spiritual goals and align your beliefs and your core beliefs together. If they believe in having a swing relationship, then I don't know if that's really a core spiritual person that I want to be with. I can cut that off like right now. Because you're not on the same path that I'm on. And so we don't even have to get deep at that point. You're finding ways, like we wrote the boundary statement, you're finding ways to let people in. And if you're in a dating relationship, those questions are important because I'm not letting you in any further because you don't pass the mustard. I'm not letting you in my front door. I'm not even letting you in my gate because, dude, what you're thinking about and talking about is nowhere near where I'm going. So I can cut you off really quick. So there's no emotional attachment. It's just not there because I get those questions up front quick. I don't have anything to lose. I don't care if I'm blunt or bold or whatever. I don't have time to be playing around. So it's like, dude, this is who I am. You don't like it? Peace out. Yeah, but I'm different. 2 times older than my daughter. So it's a little bit different. Like I said, at 30, I had different rules than when I'm here at this age. You have to say what's right for you. But for me, I don't have time to play. Shared spiritual practices. Pray together. Read scripture. We talked about that. Serve a higher purpose. I think that's what Latay's talking about, that their purposes are aligned. I know Sharon and her husband are doing things where they're doing things in alignment with what he likes and what she likes, so their spiritual gifts can come together. And that shared spiritual practices helping with that intimacy. Shared faith. Be vulnerable and be trustworthy. Serve and support each other, their spiritual growth. Be other oriented, looking at them as being more important than yourself. And then selfless and serve. Consider your partner's need more important than your own. Communicate sexuality. This is biblical, so we're talking about marriage. Talk openly about your desires. I remember when I was in a restaurant with Irvin. Of course, this was centuries ago, and we would sit and we were listening to this older couple, and the man was saying to his wife, he was saying, "Man, look at that woman. She really looks nice." And the wife was laughed and said, "Really? What do you like about her? She's got buck teeth." And she says, "Oh no, but look at that." And they were like talking, and she wasn't jealous, and they were just sharing what he liked. And I said to Irvin, I said, "Man, I wish we could be like that." I think when we get old, I wish we could be like that because that openness, that open communication about sexuality where you're not jealous because what are you doing looking at that one? What do you mean she got big hair? Look at my hair. No, it's not that. It was just the openness of that communication. When you're in a marriage and that intimacy, to be free to do that, that's just God, to be able to do that. And so that open communication, even in areas of sexuality, is important. So you don't get jealous and all wrapped up around yourself. It's just craziness. Be patient. Intimacy takes time and if it takes effort. Don't think it's just going to happen because you want it to happen. It's going to take deep commitment for a deep relationship. That's all I have. Any questions, comments, concerns? As we go to the next topic of Unbound, I will have the book and the layout, but that intimacy site areas is going to be important for you to maybe look at. So when we start looking at a book, you can really get something out of the book for yourself in areas of growth and intimacy outside of or in addition to areas that are physical. A lot of the books talking about sexuality, but there's other things that you can get out of the book besides, in addition to sexuality. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I wanted to know, how does sexuality equate to my husband complimenting another lady's looks?
It goes to sexuality because when I was in that restaurant, men look at people. I mean, they are physical beings, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't stop a man from looking at a woman. If you think you're going to stop them, it doesn't matter how beautiful they're going to look. And just having that conversation, you would have had to be there because as he was talking about this other woman and she was talking, they started holding hands, they started laughing together, they started having memories, and it was very intimate to see how it wasn't intimate because that man was into that woman. It was intimate because this husband and wife could talk about someone else in such a way, not to turn each other on because they're looking at the woman, but because they're having this shared experience where they can be naked and not be ashamed. They can be close about what they're thinking, about what they're feeling, and not have to hide. That's the intimacy that I saw. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're not buying it, but okay.
No, I'm just saying. I think people, it's okay until it happens to them, because I see women, guys gaze at girls behind or something, and I see women that they go along with it and they say, yeah, she does have a nice shape or whatever. But if a woman starts doing that, it don't go so well all the time. I just don't see that side of it. I don't see that side of men saying, hey, he is buff. Yeah, I like that. I do
But
not see it that way.
that's how it should be. That's how it should be. You should be able to. Women are not as not all, but generally speaking, women are not visually driven, but men are. And so that's why you don't generally have a woman saying to the man, they're buff or whatever. But it's okay if they do. If you
Mm.
have a mate that conversation, that sexual conversation is good and you don't feel threatened, that's part of being, as I think somebody said, naked and not ashamed. That's going to grow that closeness because you're not threatened because they're looking at someone. You're not threatened because he's got a build. And I can just still see that couple. I can see that man laughing at his wife. If a man came in and says, "Man, look at his pecs or look at his shoulders or whatever," I can see this man laughing and like he would do something like bulk himself. It was beautiful. I haven't
Mm.
seen it since then, but I know that's God's design because He
Okay.
wants us to be open. He wants us. I just being transparent and not having to walk on eggshells about anything is that
Well,
is what you're talking about being naked and not ashamed.
I
That's
got a lot of growing up to do, I guess, because no, I wouldn't feel threatened, but I would threaten them. If you don't turn
no.
your head and on me
Yeah.
now, what are you
That's
thinking about?
so the question I have for you is where's that coming from? And I know we did the thing on self-hate. Um,
It's coming from, you must have lost your natural mind if you're going to sit up here and lust after another woman in
it's
front of me.
not
That's where it's coming
lusting.
from.
It's not lusting, and that's the thing you have to get over. When you love someone, well, that's
Well,
just
I
something.
feel like that's disrespect. I don't know.
Okay,
You
that's
know,
fine.
Yeah,
I
I
see people
agree.
all the time that say they have celebrity crushes and stuff. They're in a secure relationship, and the husband may say he likes whoever Halle Berry, and the other person may say that their celebrity crush is Idris Elba, and that's just their thing. They're open to talk about it like that. But it's almost like an impossibility. It's an unreachable person, but I just feel like right there in front of you. I just feel like it's disrespectful,
Well,
and maybe
that's
that's because I was raised like that. So I have to
well,
get that deprogrammed out of my mind.
Well, let's say Amanda says she thinks it's disrespectful too, but what conversations then are going to be off the table and what conversations are on the table? If we're going to be naked and unashamed means naked and unashamed.
But I feel like you can be both. You can go from being disrespectful and then being naked and ashamed and have that conversation with the person. I don't think that the two should be put in the same bubble.
What two? What do you mean? Naked and not ashamed in the same bubble?
No, the disrespect is one issue.
Yeah.
Because I agree with Late. I feel like that is disrespectful. But then that's not to say that just because that person was disrespectful doesn't mean that we can't have that intimate conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I guess that the whole point, I mean, you would have really had to be there to know there was no lust there. It was that man was not lusting after that woman. It wasn't any sign of lust. It was a playfulness and a recreation between the couple. It was not a lustful conversation. But you have to decide between you and your spouse how you're going to communicate and what you're going to communicate. For me, everything's game for me. I don't want to be able to hide anything. I want to be free to talk. I don't want to have a gag order on my mouth. But go ahead, Shelley. You came off mute.
Well, I was trying again. I just wanted to say I'm excited about the next steps with this because, you talked about being really intimate with God, and I feel like I can be vulnerable and transparent and just get and be intimate with Him, but it's hard to be that way with others.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked the 12 steps that you said to look at and look at all the areas and how each one of them are so important for our wholeness, for our soul, body, and mind, and um, and just getting to that place. So I'm excited for that. But I also, one of the things when Late was talking, I think too, and you talked about this as far as feeling really safe and secure and just having that whole intimacy with your partner and knowing when, like you shared, that it can be playful and if it's being just something you can share and talk about and feeling safe enough to do that and confident in your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it is being disrespectful or not as well, but being able to talk about that too and being able to open up and be intimate and vulnerable in those situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a place you have to grow to. And like I said, this was an older couple. They had been through some stuff. It wasn't a 20-year-old couple. It was an older couple that this was. And so they've done life together. And when you do life together, um, it makes a difference for sure.
They could have been swingers for all we know. That might have been their thing.
No, I have some discernment even back then.
I'm going to raise my hand about something different.
Uh-huh.
Apostle, you were talking about emotional
Uh-huh.
um, intimacy.
Uh-huh.
I mean, what's the
Yeah, that was
emotional?
on the type. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it was about intellectual, I think.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I did not know that was. I was really relieved to hear about that because I did not know that was one. And so the world had convinced me that I was a sapiosexual, and I was quoting it. And and that is a desire for intellectual intimacy. Remember, you saying you don't want no dummy. You know what I'm saying? I had no idea that was one of the 12 ways to be. So I'm really relieved about it because I thought that word was weird, just the whole sexual part. I just don't like when we have to say words like that all the time because it just brings up something. But anyways, I'm relieved to know that that's a natural intimate desire that we're supposed to have. Because like if someone starts texting me, and I know this is judgmental and that's okay, just being transparent, and they misspell a whole bunch of words, I don't want to talk to them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because did you get through fourth grade? Have you ever been in a spelling bee? And that's just me. And I thought that it was because I was attracted to intelligent people. That's why Wisdom Ministries. I mean, these are wise individuals. I want to be near smart people. I want to, be associated myself with people that got some sense about themselves, because I completely lost my mind. But I have enough in me to know that I want to be around people that I can grow and learn from as well, and feed into as well with whatever gifts I have. But yeah, I'm just relieved to say that, because now I don't have to claim that on me anymore.
Mm,
The sapiosexual word, I don't have to claim that. I can see it now in a different perspective of, this is a form of intimacy that we're supposed to desire, rather than locking myself in this box of what type of person I am.
mm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So
And
thank you.
that's a good thing. I mean, all the areas that we can appropriate to feel close to someone is a good thing. And having a mind, um, I'm gonna need somebody that has a mind. You know what I mean? I'm not. I'm thinking they don't have to be a mathematician, but they have to be able to think. You know. Um, and yes, Shelley, intimacy with God is an important thing. The book is going to be talking about relationships, but the questions in the book is kind of asking some open-ended questions in the workbook, and you can use the 12, I think it's 12 types of intimacy. If you want to focus, I would say, think about when you get those slides, if it's an area that you want, and it's okay if it's physical, if that's what you want to, you've had trauma and you lack intimacy and you want to learn physical, that's fine. But try to take something that when you get through the book, you can learn something about you and be healed, is all I'm saying. So all of us can be looking at something different. And so if you want to look at that spiritual area, apply the answers in the workbook to a spiritual area. What I'm saying is try to stick to a consistent area so that you can see it through the book. Okay? And if it's a couple areas, that's okay too. It's just a thought. You don't have to do that. You can do it any way you want to. It's your book, workbook, and whatever God tells you to do, you can go ahead and do it. As you read the questions, God may bring something up that's totally out of left field and go that route. So, any other Yep. Yep.
Okay, so you know how you show the different sections, and one of them was avoidant.
Uh-huh. The
I don't know.
attachment styles. Uh-huh.
Yes. Okay, so how do you come? How is this lesson is basically going to teach us how to come out of that, and come to the one attachment style that is healthy? Because it looked like four of them were not healthy, and one was.
Well, it's three. And you could be a mixture of all of them. I don't know. I haven't gotten through the whole book to know if it's going to talk about attachment styles, but if that's something that you're going to want to learn, I can always add something. You know me with books, I can always add stuff
Yeah,
if
well, that's a for sure thing. I don't know if other people in the group are dealing with that. I would like to touch on it, but if it's just me, I'm cool. But that's a for sure thing that I see with my peers and people that I deal with that are around my age or younger than me, is the avoidant thing, avoiding getting attached, avoiding commitments, just looking for a good time, or um, you know,
I'll see if I can get something in there because it is talking about where you learned, how you learned about, your sexuality and that type, and knowing what your attachment style is. If you don't know, does everyone know what their attachment style is? Raise your hand on the thing if you know what your attachment style is. If you know how to raise your hand on the screen.
can we go back to that screen so they could review it?
Okay. I was just talking about that, like I said, because Paige and I was just talking about the attachment styles. Uh, oops. Uh, there it is. Secure is comfortable with intimacy and autonomy. Anxious is craves intimacy, sensitive to rejection. Avoidance is avoid closeness and seeks independence. and disorganized, is fearful of intimacy, confused about relationships.
I'm at avoidance, I know for sure.
Have you guys even heard of attachment styles? Maybe yes. No? Okay.
No.
Not before today.
Oh.
When I think of attachment, I think of somebody clingy that I don't want to deal with because you're doing too much. It's like I don't know, like a leechy draining. It's the kind of people that I don't want.
Okay, so okay, so I'll see what I can find and try to connect the attachment styles in here for you so that you can know the criteria of them and see what I can do with that. Okay, not a problem. Open a can of worms. Anything else? God, we thank you for today. We thank you for who you are, and thank you for another journey where you ended with lack of intimacy so that we can understand intimacy and where we got our ideas from, and we can grow in intimacy with you, with our spouse, with other relationships, because not all intimacy is sexual. There's so many different areas to be fulfilled. So I thank you that we will learn where we learned it incorrectly, and we will begin to learn correctly. We thank you and we glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, one thing, if we'll start the workbook next week so that you don't have to have it, and I'll just pick certain questions out of the book because there's so many questions in that workbook. But he does ask some pretty good questions. That's why I thought doing the workbook was really good, because he has me thinking on stuff, my personal life, and just kind of going through some stuff, and it kind of triggered some things I didn't even know was going on with me in the book. So I think it's going to be a good book for us. So, and in this lack of intimacy and the things like we did Love and Respect, Unbound, it's drove us right to this book. So I think we're right where we're supposed to be. Okay. Thank you. And I'll see you guys when I see you. Have a good
All
night.
right.
After you
Thank
stop
you. Good night.
recording, I wanted to say something to Shelly. She's gone.